Hello everyone, welcome to our class in Practical Research 2. I'm your teacher, Dr. Christopher Raymond S. Castillo, for this very interesting subject. Okay, so let's begin. So the common subject description of our course is for you to develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills through quantitative research. So quantitative research design, so in here, in Practical Research 2, we will be using quantitative research. Unlike in Practical Research 1, we studied about qualitative researches. So quantitative research design use numbers in stating generalization about a given problem or inquiry. In contrast to qualitative research that hardly uses statistical treatment in stating generalization, instead, it uses themes or words. So these numbers are the results of objective skills of measurement of unit of analysis called variables. In contrary, qualitative research uses subjective analysis of data. So this is one example of your skills of measurement. There are four levels of skills of measurement, just like for example is the nominal data, the lowest level, ordinal data, interval data, and ratio data. So for example, if you wanted to determine or to know the demographic profile of your respondents based on their age, so you will be using ratio data, which is determining the age of your respondents. So for example, if your height is one of the significant variables in your study, you can also use height, which uses numbers in order for you to determine that particular data of your respondent. So research findings are subjected to statistical treatment to determine significant relationship or differences between variables, the results of which are the basis for generalization about the phenomena. While in contrast, in qualitative research, as we discussed last year, that we use themes categorized from coded words. That's why in qualitative research, it is known as a thematic design. So in here, in quantitative research, we will be using a lot of statistical treatment, starting from probably the central tendency, like the mean, median, and the mode. We will also be talking about several or basic and simple statistical treatment like person R, Sperman rule, MANOVA, chi-square, and as such as we go on the latter part of our subject. The objective of our lesson for today is for you, the learner, should be able to describe the characteristics, strengths, and weaknesses of quantitative research. And number two, explain the kinds of quantitative research designs. So before we start in our lesson, let's do some activity. So in our activity, you need to determine whether the following situations are inquiry or research. So you'll just have to put a check sign on each area, now in the column, whether that is inquiry or research. So I will be giving you 2 minutes for you to do that. Let's start. time's up. So let's answer the following situation, if that is an inquiry or a research. So number one, a person wants to know the occupant of one condominium. That is an inquiry. So a student wants to know the medicinal effects of guava leaves. That is a research, correct? Mr. Cruz wants to know the technique to make his electric fan function instantly. That is an inquiry. Professor Gomez wants to discover the impact of social networking on his students' learning activities. That is a research. Aling Rosa wants to know the reasons behind the decrease of her sales for the day. So that is an inquiry. So a businessman who wants to find out which between these two marketing strategies, great tasting and attractive packaging, could increase daily sales. So that is a research. So congratulations, I hope you got all of those following items. So let's proceed. So what is the nature of inquiry and research? So one of the goals of education is knowledge acquisition. So however, education is not just stocking your brain with knowledge, but it also encourages you to use acquired knowledge for a deeper understanding of the world, an understanding that it inspires you to create, construct, or to produce things for the betterment of not only your own life, but the whole world as well. And how is this possible? So this is through inquiry and research. So by meaning, inquiry is a term that is synonymous with the word investigation. So it is the answer to the question. When you inquire or investigate, you tend to ask questions to probe or examine something. You do this kind of examination through your thoughts, which is the higher order thinking skills or strategies of inferential, analytical, critical, creative, and appreciative thinking to discover more understandable or meaningful things beyond such object of your inquiry. Thinking is, in this manner, makes you ask open-ended questions to elicit views, opinions, and beliefs of others in relation to your research. So let's start with the characteristics of a quantitative research. So the first characteristic of a quantitative research is that methods or procedures of data gathering includes items like age, gender, educational status, among others, that call for measurable characteristics of the population. So if you will be gathering data like age, then you need to determine the number of years of a certain person. If you're determining the gender, which is assigned by male and female, you can use nominal data by assigning male as 1 and female as 2. Educational status as well can be assigned in numbers, just like for example, if you're in elementary grade, you can assign that as level 1. In secondary, you can assign that as level 2. In tertiary education, you can assign it as 3. And in master's degree or postgraduate education, you can assign it as 4. So in here, methods and procedures of data gathering includes numbers. So that's the first characteristics. The second one is standardized instruments guide data collection, thus ensuring the accuracy, reliable, and validity of data. Standardized instruments like, for example, a metric scale. For example, if you want to determine the height of a person, you need to use a metric scale in inches or in feet or in centimeter. If you wanted to measure the speed of a car, definitely you need to determine the speed by miles per hour or kilometers per hour. So all of these things are used as numbers. In quantitative research, in number 3, figures, tables, or graphs showcase summarized data collected in order to show trends, relationship, or differences among variables. In sum, the charts and tables allow you to see the evidence collected. So in here, in quantitative research, when you represent your data in chapter 4, usually it is accompanied with tables or charts in order for you to show the trends or differences between two or more variables. Number 4 characteristics is that a large population yields more reliable data, but principles of random sampling must be strictly followed to prevent researchers' bias. So in quantitative research, in contrast with qualitative research, uses a large population and sample size. That's why Not unlike in qualitative research, you can only select as much as 5 or 15 or 20 participants in your study, but not in quantitative research. That's why in quantitative research, we usually use this what we call um, uh, random selection in selecting the samples using stratified or systematic random sampling, which is what we call the probability random sampling. And number 5, quantitative methods can be repeated to verify findings in another setting, thus reinforcing validity of findings. So quantitative methods can be repeated as well. And number 6, quantitative research put emphasis on proof rather than discovery. That's why in quantitative research, we usually use hypothesis in order for you to prove that the hypothesis is wrong or that hypothesis is rejected or accepted. Just like quantitative research has its own set of strengths as well as weaknesses. So let's discuss this one. So what are the strengths of quantitative research? So quantitative research design is the most reliable and valid way of concluding results, giving way to a new hypothesis or to disproving it. Why? Because we rely on objective data and not on subjective data, which is commonly used in qualitative researches. Objective data yield more reliable results or generalization of your results. Number 2, because of a bigger number of sample of a population, the results for generalization are more reliable and valid. Not unlike in qualitative research, you will only be using or you will only include a few participants. Not unlike in quantitative research, you need to include all the population and select samples from that population using a certain treatment or statistical treatment. Um, and number 3, quantitative experiments filter out external factors if properly designed. And so the results gained can be seen as real and unbiased. Quantitative experiments are useful for testing the results gained by a series of qualitative experiments, leading to a final answer and a narrowing down of possible directions to follow. So examples of external factors are the following. So we call it the Hawthorne. Number 1 is the Hawthorne effect, experimental effect, the active effect or of pretest, novelty effect, people, place, and time. So these are the external factors that you need to be mindful now when you conduct experiments or a quantitative research study. So we will be discussing this later on in our subject. So what are the weaknesses of a quantitative research? Quantitative research can be costly, difficult, and time-consuming. Difficult because most researchers are non-mathematicians, and that's why if you're not good statistician, or if you're not a statistician by profession, definitely you will be paying much, no, of your money to uh, to these statisticians, and that's why you need to be a good mathematician or a statistician whenever you will conduct a quantitative research. This is one of the predicament of a quantitative researcher. Number 2, quantitative studies require extensive statistical treatment, requiring stringent standards, more so with confirmation of results. When ambiguities in some findings surface, the testing and refinement of the design call for another investment in time and resources to polish the results. So if you have this what we call erroneous data, definitely you need to recompute again. And if you yield what we call unreliable data sometimes, in order for you to validate your data, you need to make use of another statistical treatment in order for you to find out if those data or results that yields in your statistical treatment is reliable. And number 3, quantitative methods also tend to turn out only proved or unproven results, leaving little room for uncertainty or gray areas. For the social sciences, education, anthropology, and psychology, human nature is a lot more complex than just simple yes or no. That's why most of the time, if you wanted to discover something or to explore something, no, quantitative research is not a design that's fitted for your study. And quantitative research has limitations as well because this is not a what we call a discovery approach or design in conducting a research study. All right, let's go to the different kinds of quantitative research design. So what is a research design? A research design refers to the overall strategy that you can choose in order to integrate the different components of the study in a coherent and logical way. So what are the components of your study? We have the introduction, in chapter 1, the statement of the problem, background of the study. We have the significance of the study, all of those things. In chapter 2, we have the review of related literature. We have the conceptual framework, the paradigm of the study, the definition of terms. So you should know all of these components of your research, and thereby ensuring that you will be effectively addressing the research problem. Furthermore, a research design constitutes the blueprint for the selection, measurement, and analysis of data. The research problem determines the research design that you should use. So the research design is like a blueprint according to our text. So a blueprint is like a plan. It's like, for example, you want to build a house. This is the blueprint of the house. So in the blueprint, you can find the design, the structure, on how it's built. You have the foundation. You have the different electrical lines, the different materials that you need to use. So same as with research. So research design uh, is a plan, no, in order for you to conduct a study. And in order for you to make a research design, you need to determine the research problem, which is found in the statement of your problem, which is conceptualized in your research title. Okay, so quantitative methods emphasize objective measurement and statistics, mathematical or numerical analysis of data collected through polls, questionnaire, and surveys, or by manipulating pre-existing statistical data using computational techniques. So in a quantitative method, we will be using this what we call numbers in order for you to compute and analyze your data using your statistical treatment. So quantitative research designs has many types or kinds. So we have two categories of research. We have the qualitative, which we already discussed in practical research 1, and in quantitative research design, in which there are two kinds. So we have the experimental and non-experimental. In the experimental type, we have different kinds of experimental type of research. We have the true experimental, quasi-experimental, and the pre-experimental, in which we will be discussing that later on in our slides. The non-experimental research, in which it doesn't include the intervention of a certain independent or dependent variables. Now you will be using is what we call descriptive research design, in which we will be employing survey, correlational studies, ex post facto, comparative studies, evaluative, and methodological studies. So these are the different kinds of descriptive research. So let's proceed with the first kind of quantitative research. So let's proceed to experimental research design. Experimental research design allows the researcher to control the situation. Usually, this is conducted inside the laboratory or in the clinical setting. In doing so, it allows the researcher to answer the question, what caused something to occur? So this kind of research also allows the researcher to identify cause and effect relationship between variables and to distinguish placebo effects from treatment effects. So further, this research design supports the ability to limit alternative explanation and to infer direct causal relationship in the study. The approach provides the highest level of evidence for single studies. For example, if you try to compare a massage in order for it to relieve pain compared to that of the medications, paracetamol or analgesic to relieve pain, which is better? Is it the massage or is it the medication? So usually, the cause is the massage and the pill, which is the analgesic or the paracetamol, and the effect would be to relieve pain, which is much better. Is it the massage or giving pills to your respondent? So that is what you call the cause and effect. So you would know what were the cause and effect of this what you call relationship between two or three different variables. So what is a placebo in experimental research? So this is anything that seems to be real medication treatment, but it isn't. It could be a pill, gamot, a shot, or probably an injection, or some other type of fake treatment. What all placebo have in common is that they do not contain any active substance meant to affect health. But as a participant in the study, usually in the control group which receives placebo treatment, as if they're already receiving the kind of treatment that the other group is also receiving. So it has a psychological effect on the respondents or the control group or the subjects that that the treatment is effective on them. But in reality, it's not, because what they only receiving is the placebo or anything that doesn't have any therapeutic or adverse effect on the subjects. So there are two groups in the experimental research. You have the control group and the experimental group. So the experimental group is the one on which the treatment or implements is applied. The control group, which usually does not receive any treatment, or they're the one receiving the placebo treatment. Thus, the object or subjects involved in these types of research are chosen randomly or selected by chance, meaning we usually employ this what we call probability random sampling. Rather than by the decisions of the researcher, usually this is a judgmental sampling, and which is included in the non-probability random sampling. So what is important here in the experimental research is that when you select a subject or a respondent of your study, it should have to be selected randomly. So why we call that randomization. So we have the first type of experimental research. We have the pre-experimental research. So this type of research applied to experimental design with the least internal validity. One type of experiment is the single group pre-test post-test design, which measures the group 2 times before and after the intervention. So this is one example. So the pre-test and the post-test. So you'll be giving the pre-test, and then you observe, and then the post-test, and then you observe it again. Okay, instead of comparing the pre-test with the post-test within one group, the post-test of the treated group is compared with that of the untreated group. Measuring the effect as the difference between group marks this as between subject design. Assuming both groups experience the same time-related influences, the comparison group featured should protect this design from the rival explanation that threatens the within subject design. So there are two classes of experimental design that can provide better internal validity than pre-experimental design. This is the other type of experimental research, which is the quasi-experimental and the true experimental design. So in the quasi-experimental research, the researcher can collect more data either by scheduling more observations or finding more existing measures. So in here, the only difference between the true experiment and the quasi-experimental design is that quasi-experimental research design doesn't have any randomization in selecting their samples or subjects of the study. So for example, to perform an educational experiment, a class might be arbitrarily divided by alphabetical selection or by seating arrangement. So with the word arbitrarily, it means that the researcher is unrestrained and autocratic in the use of authority in selecting his sample. So he uses judgmental sampling in this situation. So the division is often convenient for him, for the researcher, and especially in an educational situation, which causes as little disruption as possible. After the selection, the experiment proceeds in a very similar way to any experiment, with a variable being compared between different groups and over a period of time. So they're being treated and then they're observed. And of course, what has been done or intervention has been done to experimental design is also done in a quasi-experimental design. The only difference is the randomization and selection of subjects or groups of respondents. The third type of experimental research design is the true experimental design. A true experimental design controls both time-related and group-related threats. Two features mark true experiment: two or more differently treated groups, which is the control group or the experimental group. You can either have two experimental or one control group, or vice versa. And the random assignment to these groups. So we have this what we call uh, probability sampling in selecting your subjects or respondents of the study. These features require that the researcher have control over the experimental fitment and the power to place subjects in groups. True experimental design employs both treated and control groups to deal with time-related rival explanations. So a control group reflects changes other than those due to the treatment that occurs during the time of the study. Such changes include effects of outside events, maturation by the subject, changes in measure, and impact of any pretest. True experimental design offers the highest internal validity of all the designs. In a quasi-experimental research, this differs from the true experimental design by the absence of random assignment of subjects to different conditions. What quasi-experiments have in common with true experiments is that some subjects receive an intervention and provide data like to reflect its impact. So there are types of quasi-experimental design. The first type is the non-equivalent control group design. So in here, this design commonly used when random assignment is not possible. So meaning there's no randomization. That's why it's called a quasi-experimental design. So similar to pretest post-test control group design. So with a pre-experimental design, it's the same. And the selection bias is a threat to validity. So non-equivalent control group design refers to a chance failure of random assignment to equalize the conditions by converting a true experiment into this kind of design for purpose of analysis. So the second one is the interrupted time series design. So a single group of participants repeatedly pre-tested. So it is the baseline of your data, and then administered treatment, and then repeatedly post-tested. So you'll be conducting three data collection: pre-testing without any treatment. The second is you administer the treatment, and the third one is repeatedly post-tested. So you will be conducting pre-test and the post-test. So baseline behavior prior to treatment administration, and then effect of treatment demonstrated by the discontinuity in the pre-baseline versus the post-test response. So useful when equivalent convalescent group cannot be identified. So interrupted time series design employs multiple measures before and after the experimental intervention. It differs from single group pre-experimental that has only one pretest and one post-test. User of this design assume that the time threats, such as a history or maturation, appears as regular changes in the measures prior to the intervention. So let us proceed with experimental research design. Non-experimental research design, these are approaches when the researcher is unable to control the variables or the nature of the question is not causal, meaning it doesn't have any intervention or manipulation of the subjects in order for you to yield results based on your predictions. In general, a non-experimental research design includes research where the researcher does not manipulate an independent variable. It has a limited or no control over the nature or timing or of the treatment. So when the causal relationship are not the primary focus of the research. In this design, the researcher observes the phenomena. That's why it's called naturalistic, as they occur naturally and no external variables are introduced. Not unlike in the laboratory, in which you will manipulate the independent variable based on the interventions that you will apply to the subjects or to the respondents in order for you to yield the results that is intended in your study. In this research design, the variables are not deliberately manipulated, nor is the setting controlled. Researchers collect data without making changes or introducing treatment. So the most common in non-experimental is what we call the descriptive research design. So descriptive research design typically involves the researcher observing and systematically recording some particular behaviors for the purpose of better describing the behavior in question. So some common descriptive design include the following, like for example the survey, just like what the SWS is doing, no, regarding probably um, uh, the performance of our president, or probably the programs or the effectiveness of the program of certain government, like for example the uh, interagency task force for COVID-19, so all of those things. Another example is the archival data methods. So in this technique, it involves analysis of any type of public records of behavior, such as government records, newspapers, or speeches, and letters of public figures, television, and radio broadcast. So usually this is done using this what we call discourse analysis or content analysis, in which you will be um, studying the content of certain documents. The third one is the naturalistic observation. This is the most commonly used by psychologists and other social scientists, particularly in research. This technique involves observing and studying the spontaneous behavior of participants in the natural surroundings. The researcher may simply record what they see and whatever way they can. So usually this is used in a lot of studies like descriptive researches, correlational or comparative studies, no? And so this is the most common method used in descriptive research design. And the fourth one is the structured test method. So this method involves setting up or structuring some test situation to determine how individuals behave in that situation. So this is usually conducted in action researches. So there are types of descriptive research designs. So the first one is the large-scale survey or the survey. This is a research design used when the researcher intends to provide a quantitative or numeric description of trends, attitudes, or opinions of a population by studying a sample of that population. So for example, in the SWS survey, the SWS wanted to find or determine the opinion of the public regarding the performance of the president as of 2015 or 2020, or the opinion of the public regarding that penalty. So those are the examples. The second one is the correlational research, which has three types. So the first type is the bivariate correlational studies. This obtains scores from two variables. That's why it's called bivariate. Bi means two and variate means two variables. So then use them to calculate the correlational coefficient. The term bivariate implies that the two variables are correlated. Variables are selected because they are believed to be related. Like for example here, children of wealthier, this is the variable 1, and better educated, variable 2, parents earn higher salaries as adults. The second one is the prediction studies. Use correlation coefficient to show how one variable, the predictor variable, predicts another, the criterion variable. So in our example, which high school applicants should be admitted to college. So the qualification of the high school applicants will be the predictor variable, and those who are qualified to be admitted to college, this is the criterion variable. So one example for this is the qualification of the high school graduates, which is their general weight average. Sometimes college will require the applicants that they should have at least 85% of general weighted average before they can take the college entrance examination or the college admission test. So the second criterion will be the college admission test results. In order for them to be qualified, they need to pass those examinations. So this is an example of prediction studies. We had the third one is the multiple regression prediction studies. Suppose the high school GPA is not the sole predictor of college GPA, what might be the other good predictors? All of these variables can contribute to the overall prediction in an equation that adds together the predictive power of each identified variable. So the GPA, for example, regarding the academic performance of the students. So what are the influences in the academic performance of the students? So number one, probably their study habits. The second one is the parental supervision. The third one, probably their peers. So these are what we call multiple variables affecting the dependent variable, which is the GPA. So we call this a multiple regression prediction studies. Another example here is the labor productivity analysis using multiple linear regression technique. This is a study in which the researcher predicted that what affects the performance of workers includes, number one is the high compensation, good work environment, and peer relationship. So the researcher wanted to find out what among the independent variables significantly affects the labor productivity. So this is what we call the multiple regression prediction studies. So the third type of descriptive research is what we call the ex post facto research design. So the ex post facto research design, these are the non-experimental designs that are used to investigate causal relationship. They examine whether one or more pre-existing conditions could possibly have caused subsequent differences in groups of subjects. Researchers attempt to discover whether differences between groups have results in unobserved differences in the independent variables. So example, what is the effect of homeschooling on the social skills of adolescents? So ex post facto, meaning the homeschooling is the one affecting the social skills of the adolescents. So in the past, the children or the child was homeschooled. Then eventually he went to college and he went to the private schools or public schools. What will be the social skills of this adolescent who underwent homeschooling during his formative years? So that's one example of the ex post facto research design. So the fourth descriptive type of research study is what we call the comparative design. This involves comparing and contrasting two or more samples of study subject on one or more variables, often at a single point of time. Specifically, this design is used to compare two distinct groups on the basis of selected attributes such as knowledge level, perceptions and attitudes, physical or psychological symptoms. So for example, we compared the study in the health problems among rural and urban older people from the district Misana Gorat. So they tried to compare the attributes of the rural and urban older people, but based on probably productivity or the way of life or probably the standard way of living. So that is comparative design. The fifth type of descriptive research design is what we call the evaluative research. This seeks to assess or judge in some way, providing information about something other than might be gleaned in mere observation or investigation of relationship. So for example, where a test of children in school is used to assess the effectiveness of teaching or the deployment of a curriculum, like for example the K-12. So in the teaching curriculum of the K-12 usually it employs this what you call um, the teacher as a facilitator only. So this examination of the students will determine if the program is effective. So evaluation research is conducted to elicit useful feedback from a variety of respondents from various fields to aid in decision making or policy formation. So there are various types of evaluation research depending on the purpose of the study. So the first one is what we call the formative evaluation. So this is used to determine the quality of implementation of a project, the efficiency and effectiveness of a program, assessment of organizational processes like procedures, policies, guidelines, human resource development, and the like. And the second one is a summative evaluation, which involves making judgment about the efficacy of a program or course at its conclusion, at the end of the program. So formative evaluation is typically conducted during the development or improvement of a program or course. So these are the example of, this is the difference between the two. So in the formative evaluation, judgment of the strengths and weaknesses of instruction in the developing stage, while in the summative evaluation, you measure the extent to which the outcome of a course are attained at the end of the course. The sixth one is the methodological research design. So in this approach, the implementation of a variety of methodologies forms a critical part of achieving the goal of developing a skill match approach where data from different disciplines can be integrated. So this refers to the procedures or methods of a certain program to be conducted or to be evaluated in your research. Alright, that ends our lesson for today. So let's try to review our objectives. So the first objective is for you to describe the characteristics, strengths, and weaknesses of quantitative research. So we already discussed that in details and explain the kinds of quantitative research design. So we already have explained this, so we have met our objectives for this lesson. So your homework are the following. Okay, so you need to um, do this at home and write your answer in Microsoft Word and send it to my account or Gmail account individually. So I will be giving you 3 days for you to finish this homework. So for our references, we have 2 references that I'm using right now. If you wanted to make an advanced reading about our next topic, I want you to read the Practical Research for Senior High School 2 by Prieto, Nabal, and Care, or Practical Research 2 by Barceros. So thank you and good day.